All right, let's dive right into this. You sent over some seriously interesting stuff about the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. We've got the Wikipedia entry laying out the story of this ghost and, of course, that famous photograph.
Yeah, it's really something, isn't it? This whole ghost story tied to one specific place and, made even more famous by that one single image just keeps grabbing people's attention. It says a lot about how we humans are just drawn to the unexplained.
You're right.
Yeah.
So your mission, should you choose to accept it, and you have, is to guide us through this mystery. We need to figure out who this brown lady is supposed to be. What were the big sightings and the full story behind that photograph? Why it might not be as straightforward as it seems.
Exactly. It's all about looking at these claims with a critical eye. It's not just about the stories themselves, but understanding the context, Could there have been misunderstandings? And how much does suggestion play a role?
So let's start at the beginning with who this ghost is supposed to be. The legend says it's Dorothy Walpole, born in 1686 and died in 1726. She was actually the sister of Robert Walpole, considered Britain's first prime minister.
Right, and when you connect a ghost story to a real historical figure like Dorothy Walpole, it instantly makes it feel more real. It's like you're giving the haunting a backstory grounded in actual events. It becomes less of an abstract idea and more something you can almost touch.
And the story takes a dramatic turn with her marriage to Charles Townshend, the second Viscount Townshend, which, by the way, is a rank in British nobility just below an earl. Apparently he had quite a temper. The story goes that he found out Dorothy was having an affair with Lord Wharton, and his reaction was extreme.
Yeah, the supposed punishment being locked up in her rooms at Raynham Hall, that really adds to the legend. This idea of betrayal and imprisonment creates a sense of injustice, like some wrong that needs to be righted. It fits with a lot of classic ghost stories where a spirit is attached to a place of suffering.
And there's another twist involving Mary Wortley Montagu, who suggested that Dorothy wasn't just caught by chance. She might have been deliberately set up by the Countess of Wharton. The Countess supposedly invited Dorothy over, knowing that Townshend, in his rage, would never let her leave, essentially trapping her and separating her from her children.
Wow, that adds a whole new layer to the story, right? It goes beyond a simple wronged wife narrative and throws in manipulation and social scheming. Whether or not it's historically accurate, it definitely makes the story around Dorothy Walpole even richer.
Right, so she's said to have remained confined at Raynham Hall until her death from smallpox in 1726. Now let's get into the sightings themselves. The first detailed account we have is from Lucia C. Stone. She talks about a Christmas gathering at Raynham Hall in 1835. Apparently their host, Charles Townshend at the time, had invited guests, including a Colonel Loftus.
This Christmas of 1835 is really important in the Brown Lady's history. It gives us the first specific written account from someone who claimed to have seen her.
Stone mentions that Loftus and another guest, a Mr. Hawkins, both said they saw the Brown Lady one night as they were going to their rooms. They even specifically mentioned she was wearing an old-fashioned brown dress.
That detail about the brown dress, that's key. It becomes a visual link that connects this early sighting to later ones, and importantly to the photograph. It helps solidify the image of a specific ghost.
And things get really creepy for Colonel Loftus. The next evening, he claimed to have run into her again. This time, he was really shaken by her empty eye sockets. He described them as dark holes in her glowing face. That's an image that would stick with anyone.
Yeah, the whole idea of missing or empty eyes, that's powerful stuff in folklore and ghost stories. It makes you think of something unnatural and deeply unsettling. The fact that these sightings supposedly made some staff leave Raynham Hall shows you how much these stories affected people.
Absolutely. Then we move on to 1836 and Captain Frederick Marryat's encounter. Now, he was a friend of Charles Dickens and a well-known author of Sea Adventures. And this is where it gets really interesting. He didn't just see the ghost, he went looking for it.
That changes the whole dynamic, right? He wasn't just a guest or someone who happened to be there. As a writer and someone known for being worldly, he seemed to approach the haunting with a bit of skepticism, maybe even seeing it as inspiration for his writing.
The story as told by his daughter Florence Marryat in 1891 is pretty amazing. Apparently he asked to sleep in the most haunted room, specifically to disprove the legend. He thought it was all made up to scare away smugglers, but he wasn't messing around. He slept with a loaded revolver under his pillow.
Oh, wow, that definitely ups the ante. It shows that while Marryat might have doubted the idea of a traditional ghost, he wasn't ruling out some kind of danger, whether it was human or something else. The fact that he was prepared shows just how powerful the legend was, even for someone who considered himself a skeptic.
For 2 nights, nothing happened. But on the 3rd night, 2 young men nephews of the baronet knocked on his door late. They wanted his opinion on a new firearm. So there he was in his shirt and trousers, walking with them down the corridor. He even grabbed his revolver jokingly, saying, "Just in case we meet the brown lady."
That's interesting how casual he was about it after specifically trying to debunk the haunting. It makes you think maybe even he was starting to feel the atmosphere or the weight of all those local stories.
Well, as they were coming back, the corridor was dimly lit, but they saw a lamp flickering toward them. The young Townsends thought it might be one of the ladies of the house on her way to the nurseries. Now, these old houses often had double doors with a space between them. So Marriott, feeling a bit underdressed, slipped into the outer doorway to wait for her to pass. His friends followed him.
It's like that act of looking for a moment of privacy accidentally put him in the perfect spot for a close encounter. It's a great story, whether it's completely true or embellished over time.
Exactly. He described watching the figure come closer through the crack in the door. As she got nearer, he recognized the colors and the style of her clothes. He said it was a perfect match for the portrait of the brown lady. He had his finger on the trigger of his revolver ready to tell her to stop when the figure stopped right outside the door.
And then the really creepy part. The figure lifted the lamp to its face and, according to the story, grinned at him in a malicious and diabolical manner. It's a very specific detail and definitely meant to convey evil intent.
You bet it got a reaction out of Marriott. The story says he jumped into the corridor and fired his revolver right at her face, and the figure vanished instantly. Not faded away, but completely gone. The bullet amazingly went through the outer door on the other side of the corridor and lodged itself in the inner panel.
That detail about the bullet hole, if it was real and connected to this event, would be pretty strong evidence. But even then, people could argue about what it meant. Florence Marriott's account ends by saying her father never tried to mess with the brown lady again. It seems like the encounter, whether it was a real paranormal event or a vivid hallucination, really affected him.
Sounds like it. So then in 1926, Lady Townsend reported that her son and his friend claimed to have seen the ghost on the staircase again, identifying her as Dorothy Walpole from the portrait. It's interesting, after Marriott's dramatic encounter, reports of the brown lady at Raynham Hall seemed to become less frequent. Some even said she moved on to haunt nearby places like Houghton Hall and Sandringham House.
This idea of a ghost changing locations, that's a classic element in these stories. It lets the legend live on even when there aren't as many sightings in the original spot. It keeps the story adaptable.
But there's no doubt the brown lady story really took off because of that photograph published in Country Life magazine in 1936. That's the image most people think of when they hear about this haunting.
Yeah, that photograph was a game changer. It took the brown lady from just stories to what looked like photographic evidence, something that could be copied, examined, and debated on a much wider scale.
So the story goes that on September 19, 1936, Captain Hubert C. Provand, a photographer for Country Life, and his assistant, Indre Shira, were at Raynham Hall taking pictures for an article. They'd already photographed the main staircase and were setting up for another shot when Shira said he saw a vapory form gradually taking the shape of a woman, coming down the stairs right at them.
And the speed of their reaction is a key part of how the photo supposedly came to be. Shira is said to have alerted Provand, who was under the dark cloth of a large format camera. That was a common type of camera back then that needed a dark cloth to see the focusing screen. So he had to act fast to take off the lens cap while Shira triggered the flash.
And when they developed the negative there, it was the now famous image of the brown lady gracefully descending the staircase. It was published in Country Life on December 26, 1936, and got even more attention when it appeared in Life magazine.
That widespread exposure really cemented the brown lady's place as one of the most recognizable ghosts, not just in the UK, but worldwide. It gave the whole legend a seemingly undeniable visual.
Right, and adding to the idea that it was real was the endorsement from Harry Price. He was a big name in paranormal investigation at the time. He interviewed both Provand and Shira and said he was impressed by how straightforward their account was. Price reportedly found no reason to doubt them and said the negative didn't look tampered with. He suggested that if it was fake, the only way it could have happened was if the photographers were in on it together. His opinion held a lot of weight back then.
Oh, definitely. Price's acceptance was a big deal because he was a leading voice in psychical research. That endorsement made the photograph much more believable to the public and a lot of paranormal enthusiasts.
But like we mentioned earlier, the photograph has had its fair share of skeptics over the years. People come up with a bunch of theories suggesting it's not what it looks like.
And that critical examination is important. The very fact that this photo has been scrutinized for decades shows how powerful it is and how fascinated we are by the paranormal and the possibility of being tricked.
Some people have suggested that Shira could have faked the ghost. Maybe he put grease on the camera lens in the shape of a woman, or even moved quickly down the stairs himself during a long exposure. You know that technique where the shutter stays open and captures movement as a blur?
Those are definitely possible ways to create a ghostly illusion using the techniques available at the time. You can't rule out a hoax, whether it was for publicity or just a prank, when you're looking at these kinds of images.
Joe Nickell, a well-known skeptic, has said that a close analysis of the photo shows signs of a double exposure. That's where two separate images, accidentally or on purpose, get combined onto one frame. John Fairley and Simon Welfare backed this up by pointing out faint lines above each step and what looks like a repeated patch of light on the banister. They say those are classic signs of superimposition.
That double exposure theory is pretty convincing because it could easily explain why the figure looks kind of see-through and ethereal. If you accidentally or deliberately layered two exposures, it could create that semi-transparent effect we see in the photo. Knowing how double exposure works, basically exposing the same film to light twice and capturing different things each time, helps you see how that effect could happen.
And adding another layer to the skeptical side, the magician John Booth talked about how another magician, Ron Wilson, successfully recreated a very similar image. He just draped himself in a sheet on a similar staircase and took a picture. It suggests that you could get a visually similar result without anything paranormal going on.
Those recreations are so valuable because they demonstrate Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. If you can convincingly recreate something using regular methods, it makes it less likely that something extraordinary like a ghost is involved.
And maybe one of the most interesting skeptical points is how much the figure in the photograph looks like a typical statue of the Virgin Mary that you'd find in Catholic churches. Critics point to the draped robes, the covered head, the position of the hands looking like they're in prayer, and even a brighter spot at the bottom of the figure that could be the upside-down V shape of a statue's base. They're suggesting that the photo might just be a religious statue superimposed onto the staircase.
That's a visually compelling theory. The posture and overall shape of the figure do look a lot like traditional depictions of the Virgin Mary. If this was the case, it would offer a concrete, non-supernatural explanation for the image, one that aligns with known visuals. The possible presence of that pedestal shape at the bottom makes the argument even stronger for people who believe it.
So after taking this deep dive with us into the mystery of the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, what do you think? You've heard the tragic story of Dorothy Walpole, the various accounts of people encountering her ghost, and the debate about whether that famous photo is real.
It really shows you how a local legend, supported by personal stories over generations, and then seemingly confirmed by one powerful image, can grab hold of the imagination and stick around for almost a century. The Brown Lady story is a great example of how storytelling, eyewitness accounts, and photographic evidence, even when it's disputed, all come together to create a captivating and enduring story.
It makes you think about what makes us believe a ghost story.
Yeah.
Is it the first-hand experiences, the feeling that a photograph is real, even if we question it? Or is it something deeper, like our fascination with the unknown and the possibility that there's more out there than what we can see and touch?
This exploration touches on so many things, from local history and folklore to the role of visual media in shaping our perceptions and beliefs. The Brown Lady is more than just a spooky tale. It's a reflection of how we interpret and pass down stories, and how a single picture can become a powerful symbol in a broader cultural narrative.
And it leaves you with a really thought-provoking question. In our world, filled with images, how do we look at what we see with a critical eye? How do we tell the difference between what's real, what might be staged or manipulated, and those cases that fall somewhere in between? Maybe the lasting mystery of the Brown Lady isn't just about a ghost at Raynham Hall, but about our own ability to believe and the stories we choose to hold on to.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Brown Lady. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
It has been my pleasure.
And for all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, keep exploring the mysteries of the world around you, because you never know what you might find.
That's right.
Thanks again, and goodbye.
Goodbye.